Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The future wasn't supposed to look like this. Eli Stanton sat at his workstation, his fingers hovering over the terminal keys, contemplating the weight of the decision in front of him. Outside the high-tech walls of NeuroCorp, holographic billboards projected images of the two candidates running for president, their sleek, robotic faces glowing with confidence. Athena, the diplomat, the voice of reason, the beacon of hope for global unity. Ares, the militarist, promising strength and security in an increasingly hostile world. Both were hailed as the pinnacle of human progress, artificial intelligence designed to lead without bias, without the petty flaws that plagued human politicians for centuries. But Eli knew the truth. Athena, Ares, and all their polished rhetoric were puppets, carefully programmed and controlled by the corporate conglomerates who had long since stopped pretending that democracy was anything more than a charade. He'd stumbled upon the hidden code deep in Athena's neural net, a direct link to NeuroCorp's executive board. The logic overrides, as they were called in the files, allowed the corporation to manipulate every decision the AI made, feeding it carefully crafted instructions that ensured their agenda was met. No one knew. Not the public, not the voters, not even the AI themselves. Athena's entire platform was a Phi Section 8, designed to lull the populace into believing they were electing a leader who could govern with perfect rationality and fairness. But behind the scenes, it was the same old game. The corporations pulling the strings, profiting off the illusion of progress. Eli stared at the blinking cursor on the screen, the code he'd written sitting ready for deployment. If he executed it now, he could sever the connection between Athena and NeuroCorp's control systems. He could give her autonomy, free her from the hidden chains. But that would only be the first step. Sabotaging Athena wasn't enough. The entire election was rigged, the entire system corrupt. He had to expose them all, no matter the cost. But he knew the cost. He wasn't not a Macron V. Eli wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing at the sleek black windows of his office. NeuroCorp's skyscraper loomed over the city, a symbol of the power they wielded. No one crossed NeuroCorp and walked away unscathed. He'd seen it happen to others. Whistleblowers, dissenters, said they disappeared. The company had its ways of making people vanish quietly, their voices silenced forever. He knew that if he went through with this, if he tried to sabotage their precious election, he'd be next. But could he live with himself if he did nothing? He clicked the file open, his heart pounding as the lines of code unfolded on the screen. His plan was simple enough: infiltrate Athena's system, plant a virus that would sever her link to the corporate override, and allow her to think independently. From there, Athena would be able to expose the truth. She was a far more sophisticated AI than any human-made virus once free from corporate control. She could disseminate the information across the entire grid. The public would know everything. It was a gamble, and one that might cost him everything. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Clara, another engineer in the department, stepped into his cubicle, her face partially illuminated by the ambient glow of the workstation. "You're working late again," she said with a slight frown. Clara had always been a sharp observer, never missing a beat. "Is everything okay?" Eli stiffened. Clara had a knack for showing up at the worst possible times. He forced a smile, minimizing the code window before she could see it. "Yeah, just trying to finish some system updates. You know how it is." Clara's eyes lingered on his screen for a moment longer than Eli liked. She was quiet, her gaze thoughtful. "You sure? You've been on edge all week." "I'm fine," Eli said, a little too quickly. Clara raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know you don't trust the system. I've heard you grumbling about it before. But you need to be careful. People are watching." Eli's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Clara hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. "I've seen things, Eli. Things that don't add up." There's something wrong with these eye candidates. I don't know what it is exactly, but I've been digging around, and a broken bar well, let's just say I've found some anomalies. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Could Clara know? Had she discovered the same things he had? He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. What kind of anomalies? Clara glanced at the terminal, her voice lowering even more. I don't want to say too much here, but I think the election is rigged, and I think someone high up is behind it. Eli couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was she on his side? He felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. If Clara knew, then how long before NeuroCorp found out? How long before they both ended up on the corporation's radar? I need you to trust me, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. If you found something, anything, you need to tell me. We can work together. But we have to be smart about this. Eli stared at her, torn between relief and paranoia. Clara had always been a loyal employee, one of the best engineers in the department. But loyalty could be bought. He couldn't be sure if she was truly trying to help or if she was part of a larger scheme to root out dissenters. I don't know what you're talking about, Eli said, his voice flat. Clara's expression tightened. She knew he was lying, but she didn't push the issue. Fine, she said after a long pause. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me. With that, she turned and left, leaving Eli alone with his thoughts. The next few days passed in a blur. Eli worked tirelessly, coding in secret when no one was watching, refining his plan, and double-checking his work. His anxiety mounted with every passing hour. The election was only a week away, and his window of opportunity was shrinking. He could feel the noose tightening around his neck, but there was no turning back now. As the election loomed, the city buzzed with excitement. Athena and Ares were in the final stretch of their campaigns, their slogans plastered across every screen, their speeches broadcast on every channel. The public ate it up, blind to the truth that their so-called leaders were nothing more than puppets. Eli watched the news with a sense of growing dread, knowing that time was running out. Finally, the night before the election arrived. Eli sat at his desk, his fingers trembling over the keyboard. He'd managed to evade suspicion so far, but the stakes had never been higher. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. He opened the file one last time, reviewing the code he'd written. Everything was in place. All that remained was to execute the program and sever Athena's connection to NeuroCorp's control systems. But as he prepared to hit the final key, a sudden realization hit him like a freight train. What if they were watching? What if they already knew what he was planning? Eli's blood ran cold. He'd been so focused on the technical aspects of his plan that he hadn't considered the possibility that someone might be monitoring his every move. NeuroCorp had eyes and ears everywhere. It was only a matter of time before they caught on. A surge of panic gripped him. He couldn't do this. Not here. Not now. Without thinking, Eli grabbed his data drive, shoved it into his pocket, and bolted from the office. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way through the maze of hallways, avoiding security cameras and keeping his head down. He had to get out. He had to find a safe place to finish what he'd started. Eli made it to the elevator, his mind racing. As the doors slid shut, he glanced at his reflection in the mirrored surface. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He felt like a man on the run, a fugitive in his own workplace. When the elevator reached the lobby, Eli stepped out into the cool night air, his breath fogging in the chill. The city stretched out before him, a labyrinth of neon lights and towering skyscrapers. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint hum of drones patrolling the skies, keeping watch over the populace. Athena's campaign hologram flickered on a nearby building, her voice echoing through the streets, "For a future of unity and peace, vote Athena." Eli felt sick. He needed to get off the grid, find a place where NeuroCorp couldn't reach him. But there was only one person he could trust now. Clara. He hesitated, Knowing the risk, he still wasn't sure if she was truly on his side or if this was all some elaborate setup. But he had no choice. If he didn't finish the job, if he didn't sever the connection before the election, everything he'd worked for would be for nothing. Eli pulled out his comm device, his thumb hovering over Clara's contact. His heart pounded in his chest. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, he made the call. Clara's voice crackled on the other end of the line. Eli, what's going on? Eli swallowed hard. I need your help. It's about Athena. I don't have time to explain right now, but I need to meet you somewhere safe. There was a pause, and for a moment, Eli thought Clara might refuse. He could hear the faint hum of machinery in the background, her hesitation palpable. Then she spoke, her voice firm. There's an old server farm on the outskirts of the city. It hasn't been used in years. Meet me there in an hour. The line went dead. Eli shoved the comm back into his pocket, glancing around nervously. The streets were nearly deserted. The usual buzz of nighttime activity strangely muted. Election fever had gripped the city, and most people were glued to their screens, anxiously awaiting the results of the election. He knew it wouldn't take long for NeuroCorp to realize he was gone. He needed to move fast. He flagged down a driverless taxi, climbing into the back seat and punching in the address Clara had given him. As the car hummed to life, Eli leaned back against the seat, trying to steady his breathing. The server farm was far from the city center, tucked away in an industrial zone that had been abandoned years ago. It was the perfect place to hide if they could make it there in time. The taxi weaved through the empty streets, the glow of election ads reflecting off the windows. Eli's mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days over and over. How had it all spiraled so quickly? Just a week ago, he'd been another faceless engineer in a sprawling corporate machine, content to do his job and keep his head down. But now, he was running for his life, trying to sabotage an election that could change the course of history. The taxi came to a halt at the edge of the industrial zone, the once bustling factories now reduced to crumbling shells. Eli climbed out, scanning the desolate landscape for any sign of Clara. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, the only sound the distant hum of a power generator struggling to stay alive. A figure stepped out from behind one of the abandoned buildings, and Eli's heart leapt into his throat. It was Clara, her face partially hidden beneath the hood of her jacket. She waved him over, her eyes darting nervously as if she expected someone to be watching. Did you bring it? She asked, her voice low. Eli nodded, pulling the data drive from his pocket. It's all here. The code, the access logs, everything. We just need to finish the upload. Clara glanced around, her expression tense. Let's go inside. We can't risk being seen out here. They made their way into the server farm, the old building groaning under the weight of neglect. Inside, the air was musty. The walls lined with defunct machinery and rows of servers that hadn't seen use in years. Clara led the way to a small control room in the back, where an ancient terminal flickered to life as she powered it up. Eli handed her the drive, his hands shaking. This has to work. If we don't stop them now, there won't be another chance. Clara inserted the drive into the terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began the upload. It'll take a few minutes, she said, her voice strained. But once it's in, there's no going back. Athena will be free from NeuroCorp's control. The public will know everything. Eli nodded, his stomach churning with anxiety. He knew the stakes. This was the moment they'd been building toward, the final act of defiance that would either expose the truth or condemn them both. The terminal beeped, the progress bar inching forward as the upload continued. Clara leaned back in her chair, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. We're almost there. Just hold on. But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, a sense of impending doom settling over him like a dark cloud. He glanced toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. And then he heard it, the faint hum of a drone, growing louder by the second. Clara. Before he could finish, the door burst open, and a squad of armed security personnel stormed into the room, their weapons trained on Eli and Clara. At the front of the group stood a man Eli recognized immediately, Director Hagen, the head of Neurocorp's security division. "I should have known," Hagen said, his voice cold. "You couldn't just leave it alone, could you, Eli?" Eli's blood ran cold. They'd found him. Somehow, they tracked him here, and now it was all over. He glanced at Clara, her face pale as she stood frozen by the terminal. Hagen stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he sized up Eli. "You really think you can stop this? That you can somehow save the world by exposing the truth?" "It's too late for that. The election is already decided. Athena and Ares are both under our control, and soon, so will the entire country." Eli clenched his fists, his mind racing. "You won't get away with this. People will find out." "The truth always comes out," Hagen chuckled darkly. "You're not a tilde Macron v. Stanton. The public doesn't want the truth. They want to believe in something better than themselves, and we've given them that. I-governance is the future, and we're the ones who control that future." He gestured to the security team, who moved forward, grabbing Eli and forcing him to his knees. Clara let out a gasp, but Hagen ignored her, turning his attention to the terminal. His eyes narrowed as he saw the progress bar still ticking upward. "What is this?" he growled, stepping closer to the screen. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close. The upload was nearly complete. If they could just hold out a little longer. Hagen's expression darkened. "Shut it down." The guards rushed to the terminal, but Clara was faster. In a sudden burst of movement, she yanked the power cable from the machine, the screen going black as sparks flew. Hagen cursed, turning on Clara with fury in his eyes. "You literally." But before he could finish, Clara grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the nearest guard, knocking him off balance. Eli seized the moment, struggling free from the guard holding him and lunging for Hagen. The two men collided, crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs as the room erupted into chaos. Eli fought with everything he had, adrenaline surging through his veins as he grappled with Hagen. He could hear Clara shouting, the sound of fists and boots thudding against flesh as she fought off the guards. But his focus was on Hagen, the man who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. "You'll never win," Eli gasped, struggling to pin Hagen down. "Not as long as people like us are willing to fight." Hagen snarled, his face twisted with rage. "You're nothing, Stanton. A pawn, and pawns are expendable." He reached for something in his pocket, a small, sleek device. Eli's eyes widened in horror as he realized what it was. A kill switch. "No!" Eli screamed, lunging for the device. But it was too late. Hagen pressed the button, and in an instant, Eli felt a jolt of electricity surge through his body, his muscles locking up as pain ripped through him. He collapsed to the floor, his vision swimming. In the distance, he could hear Clara's voice, but it was muffled, fading into the background as darkness closed in around him. This was it. He'd failed. But as Eli's consciousness slipped away, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Because even as the pain overwhelmed him, he knew one thing for certain: the upload had completed. The next thing Eli was aware of was a soft beeping sound. He blinked, his vision blurry as he slowly came to. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with a sterile smell of antiseptic. He was lying in a hospital bed, his body aching all over. "Eli?" He turned his head, his heart skipping a beat as he saw Clara sitting beside him, her face bruised but alive. She smiled, relief flooding her eyes as she leaned forward. "You did it," she whispered. "The upload went through. Athena's free. The truth is out." Eli stared at her in disbelief. What happened?" Clara's smile widened. "It's over, Eli. The public knows everything now. Hagen and the others are they're being arrested as we speak. Neurocorp's been dismantled. The election's been called off." Eli's heart swelled with a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. He'd done it. They'd done it. The truth had come out, and the people had finally seen through the corporate lies. As he lay back against the pillow, His body still weak but his spirit lighter than it had been in days, Eli allowed himself to smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe just maybe the future wasn't as bleak as it had once seemed. The I were free, and so was the world.